Hello everyone. Welcome to Art and Experience, Art 100. Over the next semester we're going to be exploring this huge subject, and that subject would be art from a variety of perspectives. We'll look at maybe some of the motivations, why people make art. We'll look at a variety of ways that people make art or media and methods, and we'll also explore art's impact on society. And you'll even have your own opportunity to make a little bit of art yourself. But before we go any further, allow me to introduce myself. Hi everybody, I'm Cynthia Dollard and I will be your instructor for this course. I'm talking to you now from my art studio, which is located an hour and a half or 2 hours south of the college. In addition to teaching online at OTC, I also teach painting and drawing at North Arkansas College. And I just really love sharing art with others, whether that be in collaborative projects, in teaching art, or in just making art all the way around. Now, this is where I'll be working from. This is my art studio. I live nearby, and you can visualize me like this. Here I am teaching the course. But there might be some days when you need a little bit of levity in your life. You want to maybe have a little extra something to cheer you up. So on those days, I invite you to picture me in a slightly different way. Ready? Here goes. So how about it? You see the likeness? Here we have self-portrait as an elehuman. This is a drawing that I did many years ago, but it's just kind of fun. It's fun to look at it, and it's fun to imagine that, there might be some days when I actually feel like this. And I can kind of see the likeness. Okay, so there's one way that you can visualize your instructor, and here's another one. Here's my little cabin with a couple of my furry friends, and I love my home in the Ozarks in the mountains. I live on a beautiful bluff's edge, and I share my home with family and furry friends, and we all have a big old time. So that's enough about me. Hey, let's talk about art, which is really what we're here to talk about, isn't it? Okay, so living with art. That means we're going to look at art from a wide variety of angles, and I'd say this is one angle with which people could look at art. Looks kind of analytical. I somehow just love this picture, even though it's goofy as can be. Every single person in this photograph probably has their own view of the artwork. But let's go quickly through the chapters, just bit by bit, so we can see what we're going to be talking about over the next many weeks. Well, early on in the textbook, we're going to be talking about themes in art. And if we were all in a classroom, I'd ask if anybody could name this artist. And I can hear somebody out there saying Andy Warhol. This is a self-portrait by this revolutionary artist who, he started out in advertising. And then he kind of let's say, he decided to make fun of the art world and all of the imagery, in particular popular imagery of the time. This is a very interesting study because I think we can get enamored with images from pop culture. So this is actually done with a silk screen, and he did many repetitive images like this. So let's move on. What else are we going to be talking about? Oh, we'll move on to the visual elements. Now, the visual elements, I would say, is one of the most important chapters that we'll study if you want to increase your overall literacy as pertaining to the arts. What we mean by visual elements are elements such as line, shape, texture, there's value, but I don't mean how much something's worth. I mean the gradation between light and dark, etc. So we'll look at these terms which can apply to everything else that we'll study throughout the semester. And then again, on the same track, we have the principles of design, which are rhythm, unity, emphasis like that. For those of you that are designing, and really in any sense of the word, whether that be a table for a holiday or an advertisement or a painting, to understand and have a grasp of these concepts will so profoundly help what you do. Now here we have an example of simply shoes, right? So when we look at principles of design and the visual elements, they can somehow apply here. Because notice how there's lighting on the shoes that are orange at the top, red in the middle, sort of pink on the bottom. Do you see how they sort of come toward you? And there's a row of flip-flops just in the middle that seem to go a little bit backwards. And if you look right here, this red one, that sort of comes toward you too. Well, I would say that would illustrate this principle that warm colors, reds and oranges and pinks, they come towards us. And cool colors such as blues and greens, they tend to recede. I think you can really see this in this image. If you want to test something like that, like is it coming towards me or going away from me visually? What you do is you look at it for a split second and then make a note of what you see. All right, so let's go to drawing, shall we? Drawing. Drawing is kind of the first art form, really, isn't it? Even the cave painters that we'll look at in our very first chapter, they painted with sticks or brushes they had made by chewing on the end of sticks, really, dipped in pigment. Now, I'll be honest, what we are looking at here is an etching. It is not even a drawing, but it's by the artist M.C. Escher, and I think it really illustrates well this idea of drawing. So let's look at a few more drawings. Here's one that, well, it's just fun, okay? This artist is really good at playing with perspective and making art that seems to somehow trick the eye. Here's one more. I wonder if any of you know who this artist is. This is a very famous artist, and I love this drawing because what I want to show you here is how in just a very few lines this artist has told a whole story about a child just starting to take steps in life. Anybody know who this is? Rembrandt. That's who drew this beautiful work. Let's see, where's my next slide? From drawing, we're going to go right to painting. And painting, boy, that's a big subject. We could spend a whole semester just really studying painting. In this case, what you have is a painter painting, but it's also the painter who's painting is part of the painting, and that's a trick to the eye. I kind of like tricks on the eye. I like art that makes you look twice and is unpredictable. But, speaking as an artist, I like all kinds of art. Maybe not derivative and cliche. That's my least favorite. So this one, well, it's just weird. So I thought I would put it in as an example of painting. Here, if you look closely, these are all characters from the sea. So there's octopi, octopuses, how do you say that? Octopi, I think, and fish, and sea urchins, and barnacles, and starfish, and all sorts of things making up this figure. Now, maybe that's not really everybody's taste. So here's another way we can look at painting, which is what we call action painting. And okay, so I hear some of you in the class saying, yeah, but I'm not an artist. I don't know how to make art. Oh, okay, that's fine. Who couldn't do this? Now, I'll be honest though, when you look at the work of Jackson Pollock, who started this school of action painting, it's very powerful work. And he didn't do it as randomly as you might think. I was a little skeptical of Jackson Pollock until I saw some of his originals at the Crystal Bridges Museum, and now I am a fan. It's very powerful work. So this is one way that we can approach painting. And I would say that the underlying theme here is that really you can't mess it up because it's just a blank piece of canvas before you begin. So now let's look at another way of looking at painting. This is the great academic artist Bouguereau. And in the academic period of arts in the 1800s, painting had very definite rules. Now, one of the things that I'll just say about the symbolism here, and you guys can kind of finish the story, is that in this school of painting, The jug and the cup represent a woman's virtue. So when you see, as you do in many of Bouguereau's paintings, these sort of forlorn young women with their jugs broken, you know, okay, you can fill in the rest of the story. So I'm only sharing that because there's morality in what we would maybe just see as kind of a, kind of a boring or a cliche painting. And I think there's some of you who are looking at this that are saying, wow, that is really beautiful. And Bouguereau was truly a master. What happened with his work is that he was such a master. He took the level of realistic or idealized painting to such a place that there was really, how could one surpass him? There's no way to surpass this work in terms of realism. So what followed was Impressionism and Post-Impressionism and modern art. So Bouguereau carried this to its kind of final presentation, and then we got modern art. Of course, now many artists still create realistic work, myself being among them. I love reality, and I like to tweak reality, which is the great privilege of the artist, really. Hey, let's talk about printmaking. Maybe some of you have done some kind of woodblock prints or linoleum prints. Even etching on a piece of plexiglass is one thing that's also done. The study of printmaking covers so many different kinds of printmaking. We have silkscreen and intaglio and etching and woodblock prints, etc., etc. This is a very simple form, and it's reductive. So this artist is taking away what won't be printed, and what he's leaving will be printed. Sometimes artists do the opposite in printmaking. Let's look at just a few examples of prints. Here's a print that was made in much the same way. It looks like a woodblock print, as we saw, and it's by the artist Kathy Kolowitz, who was a very famous artist during the early part of the 20th century. Most of her art has these sort of sad themes, as she was profoundly affected as she lost many family members in World War I and in World War II. Now here's one of the most famous prints of all time. The Great Wave by Hokusai. Now, I love this print. Who doesn't love this print? I find it very interesting because it's a balance of a feeling of being peaceful, but then when you look closely, those little fellas in the boat, they're just about have this, they're going to have this huge wave crash upon them. So therein lies a contradiction. So here's one more, etching by a great master. This is by Albrecht Dürer, and this is made by using acid etching into a plate in a rather complicated process. Now, I just love this rhinoceros because it looks like it's got chainmail on, or it's got some kind of armor on, but also it's a masterful work in the art of etching. What Albrecht Dürer did, what this artist did, was he was really the first to make commercial prints that were available for sale. And so one thing he did was made a whole bunch of money. He got quite wealthy off of this, but he also made art available to the masses. Okay, so let's go from this into what next? Photography. I just love this photograph. What? Okay, so the photographer here had good timing, and it's probably very innovative for its day because most of the early photography had longer exposure times. But anyway, here we have this. I guess not much more need be said about it, but let's look at a couple of other ways we can experience photography. Here is a work by the great photographer Louis Hine, and we'll look more at his work when we get into the chapter on photography. This artist traveled throughout the South and along the East Coast and into the coal mines in the early part of the 20th century, really the first 10 years, 1900 to 1915, somewhere in that time period. And he took photographs of children working in incredibly challenging conditions. As a result of his photographs presented before Congress, child labor laws were enacted, and the laws changed so that children were no longer forced to work at sometimes at the age of 4 or 5 in these factories. And if they did work, there were protections in place for them. And of course, we have digital photography, which the chapter is actually called Camera and Digital Arts. So this is a field that is just so wide and so hard to even really define. In my own work, I do a lot of digital manipulation of my artwork for book illustration, and I find it really fun. Although making the art itself, I think my feeling is starting from a strong work of art makes the strongest end result. Okay, so let's go to graphic design. Graphic design and digital art are really intertwined, although up until maybe 15 or 20 years ago, most graphic design, a lot of it was done by hand. So here we have a couple of examples of graphic design. Don't ask me about the cat. I just kind of like the picture, so I had to put it in there. Here's some more on that. This is a wonderful example of a graphic design. This is done digitally. It's digital art as a graphics, a strong graphic. And really, when we look at the whole idea of graphic design, digital art, how do we define it, and how can we use it? What's original, what's not original, what's derivative? All of that has changed, and as as computers become more prominent and really lead the field of graphic design at this point. Let's go to sculpture. All right, sculpture, that's another broad, gigantic subject, which we will really only scratch the surface of. There's one thing I want you to notice that is essential for the sculptor to consider, and that would be the negative space. So not only does the sculptor sculpt the object, the metal, or this would probably be clay that was then cast into metal, they also sculpt the air around it. So what happens is, as this object appears in space, we see how the air, how the negative space is shaped also. In this case, that's very beautiful. Look at how this circle leads to this, and it's an overall harmonious graphic of a bird. Now here's a totally different example. Okay, this is some guy in Germany who did a lot of these, and I think they're really wonderful. Even though they're just goofy as all get out. Sometimes sculpture is designed to make you look twice, to tweak your idea of what is real and what is not, and what is acceptable, and on and on. And in this case, this artist has done that. Next chapter we'll look at is the arts and ritual of daily life, which includes the fine craft movement and ways that we have art all around us. I spent many years making my living as a full-time artist, and I did immerse in the whole fine craft field and have really quite a lot to share about that. You know, what is art? How do we define art? That's something that maybe is kind of changing. That's something that we can, you know, as we learn more, we might change how we even define that. Let's look at architecture. Wow, isn't this something? Sometimes architecture is created to cause an effect. This building makes me just generally uncomfortable. Even though I'm sure it's safe, I'm not sure I'd want to have an office right here. Now let's look at more conventional architecture, and this is more of what we think of. This is, you know, peaceful, kind of busy. Architecture, again, like painting, like sculpture, is a huge field, and we will really only scratch the surface, and we'll also look at it fairly in depth. So to wrap up, what you might have figured out is that we're going to be looking at a whole lot of art from a lot of different perspectives. In addition, there's a couple of projects that will allow you to sort of stretch your creative muscles, and that's really the fun part. One of the things that I like to emphasize as students consider making art, especially those of you who might think of yourselves as non-artists, is that each and every one of us, each one of us has an individual voice that is valid. And even if it doesn't look like museum quality the first time out, who cares? You made it. The most important part is the process. more than the end result. So I encourage you to approach all of our creative projects in the spirit of fun, like, oh wow, I get to do this at college, okay? Because that's how I'm looking at it. I really love the creative process, and I so look forward to sharing these projects with all of you and to seeing what you come up with. Now, this is going to wrap up my welcome presentation, and most of all, I want to say thank you for listening and welcome to class.